In this demonstration, we're going to look at the consumption operator, which is also part of Data Services Manager 2.0. The consumption operator essentially allows you to provision databases from a remote Kubernetes cluster. What I'm showing you here is that I have a TKG Kubernetes cluster, Tanzu Kubernetes cluster, that is being provisioned by vSphere with Tanzu. So that is the cluster that we're going to use to provision the database back on DSM. So here's the kubectl vSphere login command for just accessing the supervisor cluster and the Tanzu Kubernetes cluster within the supervisor, the one that we just saw provisioned in the vSphere client. Just going to switch context now to that TKG cluster. And we'll just very quickly, after doing that, we'll do a get nodes just to show you that it's got a single control plane node and multiple worker nodes. Just basically reflecting again what we saw on the vSphere client. So we're going to get started now with the deployment of the consumption operator. We just pulled that down from the VMware registry there, as you can see, and I've already untarred it into a directory or folder called consumption. And you can see the various Helm charts, the templates, and all of the components that go to make up our consumption operator or there. So with that now downloaded, the next step we're going to do is within the consumption cluster, we're actually going to create a namespace and we're going to create a few secrets. First secret just created there is for accessing the registry. Again, we're just using the VMware registry. You can see the registry cred secret has been created, and there's a second secret that we're going to add now as well, which is basically how to access the Data Services Manager in order to send a request to create the database. I've obfuscated the IP address for obvious reasons, but you can see that the secret has been there. So now we get to the super nuts of this. This is the values override file. This is where we put in the various information about DSM that we want to give to our developers or end users on this consumption cluster. You can see things like policy listings. You can see things like the backup locations. You can see the name of the consumption cluster, and then whether there's any privileges required for accessing that cluster. So with that, we can now go ahead and install the operator onto our guest cluster, specifying the values override and the namespace. And that looks like it has installed successfully. So with it installed successfully, we can now go ahead and actually start building some namespaces with some of the bindings that are necessary in order for particular users of that namespace to access DSM. So here you can see a manifest which is creating a namespace and also some of the bindings. So we're saying that anyone within this namespace can use that infrastructure policy and can use that backup location on DSM. So we're going to go ahead and just create that, which is a kubectl apply. And now if I want to create something within that namespace, such as a Postgres cluster or a MySQL cluster, within that dev team namespace, then I can do so, but I can only use the policy and the backup location that I specified in those bindings that we just saw previously. So here's an example of a Postgres cluster request. You can see the namespace that it's going into, and you can see the infrastructure policy, as well as the backup location down at the bottom there. And again, you cannot deviate from this. If you want to create a cluster on DSM from this namespace, you have to specify that infrastructure policy and you have to specify that backup location. You cannot use any of the other infrastructure policies that are available on DSM. There we go. Just create it like so. Let's do a get to see that it's available. There we go. And then let's flip back over to the DSM UI. You can see it's in progress. We can speed things up and the database is now ready. Great. So the point to make here is that we're not building this database on the guest cluster or on the workload cluster, or consumption cluster, if you will. We're actually building this exactly the same way that we would be building databases with DSM. In other words, it provisions its own Kubernetes cluster with its own version. of the database, but we can query it and we can request through the consumption operator that we have installed in this workload cluster. And just this is just a short script just to get you the information back, like you might want a connection string to connect to that database for your end user. All of the information is in the guest cluster. It's available to be queried. I just wrote this wrapper script around it to get the information back out. So what this does is just returns you the connection string, and then you can use that connection string to connect back to the database that you just provisioned. There you go. So thank you for watching. I hope it was useful and informative, and appreciate your time.